Hello and welcome to Toolbox Phonics. Toolbox Phonics is a play-based phonics program that can be used as your complete phonics scheme or alongside other schemes and approaches you might already be using. In this onboarding training, I'm going to take you through three things: an introduction to Toolbox Phonics itself, then how to set up your account and use the Toolbox Phonics lessons with your children, before finally showing you the other tools available on the website and how to use them. So, grab a cup of tea, get yourself comfortable for this training session, and let's start with an introduction to Toolbox Phonics and how the program works. Toolbox Phonics is built around three core pillars: systematic synthetic phonics, play-based learning, and cognitive load. Let's look at each one. Starting with Pillar 1, Systematic Synthetic Phonics, or SSP as you will commonly see it shortened to, provides a logical and progressive sequence of sounds and skills for children to learn in order to read and write. It takes children on a journey from sounds to letters to words to sentences. Most SSP programs follow a very similar progression. The reason for this is that sounds and skills are introduced in a sequence, allowing children to continuously revisit previously learnt sounds while introducing just a few new sounds each week. If you teach outside of a sequence, you can quickly find yourself asking children to read words containing graphemes they haven't yet learnt. For example, when teaching a child the sound, we would only use words containing sounds learnt up to in the sequence, and there are plenty: man, mat, mad, map, dim, sam. The child is revisiting previous sounds while practicing the new sound in these words. We wouldn't ask the child to read or spell words such as make or mouse, because these contain letter combinations they haven't yet learnt in the sequence. For example, the split A in make or the ow digraph in mouse. The system itself is also split up into core skills, and these are organised into phases, which progress in difficulty from phase 1 through to phase 6. Within each phase, the content is then split into sets. You would typically cover one set in a week, but it is absolutely fine to spend longer on a set if needed. The number of sets within each phase varies, and the larger phases are split further into subsections. For example, phase 1 is split up into 1A, 1B, and 1C. Systematic synthetic phonics essentially creates a roadmap for progression. Now, let's use the Toolbox Phonics website to quickly run through each phase now. Let's start with phase 1. Phase 1 is the pre-reading phase and is all about developing young children's listening skills. The foundation of which phonics is built on is children being able to tune into the sounds within words and use that sound knowledge to decode a word to read it or encode a word to spell it. So phase 1 is all about developing those early listening skills. This phase is split into 3 sections. Phase 1A covers environmental sounds, instrumental sounds, and body percussion. Think about very young children, how they hear and identify different animal sounds, how they explore banging and tapping objects, or moving their bodies to music. All of this builds their early auditory skills. Phase 1B then covers hearing rhyme, alliteration, and voice sounds. And finally, Phase 1C covers oral blending and oral segmenting skills, and it is these skills that transfer directly into reading and spelling in Phase 2. Phase 2 then introduces letters and their corresponding sounds, and a lot of the core skills that children will use throughout all of the later phases are introduced here. It is at this phase that we take the letters within the alphabet and match them to a sound. This is different from the letter name, which is commonly sung in the alphabet song. And whilst it's absolutely fine for children to know letter names, when it comes to reading and spelling, it is the letter sounds they need to know. And that's what this phase introduces. Children learn to link a sound to its letter before then exploring how to build words using those sounds, followed by captions and then sentences. Now, we don't teach the letters in alphabetical order A, B, C, D because there aren't many words you can build using letters in this order. Instead, letters are introduced in a logical sequence, starting with S, A, T, P, I, N. This allows children to start building words such as sat, tap, pan, pin very quickly. The exact order can vary from program to program, but the reasoning behind the sequence is the same. And that's how the individual sets are created for this phase. They are simply groups of letters taught together in an order to produce more and more words to read and spell each week. The letters aren't related in any other way. They simply appear together within the teaching sequence. Another thing I want to point out to you is that the National Curriculum for England recommends teaching common exception words alongside teaching sounds, and these should be taught across Year 1 and Year 2. Toolbox Phonics has therefore planned these common exception words directly into the sentences. Each phase, from phase 2 through to phase 5, takes a group of the Year 1 common exception words and incorporates them directly into the sentences. At Toolbox Phonics, we call these tricky words because there is a tricky part of the word that means we can't rely entirely on phonics to read them. All of the sentences in phase 2 will only include sounds and tricky words that have been taught up to that point within the program. Phase 3 introduces digraphs and trigraphs. A digraph is when two letters make one sound, such as sh, ch, e. And a trigraph is when three letters make one sound, such as I, e, e. Everything that underpins reading and spelling in this phase is exactly the same as in phase 2. Children are simply applying those skills to words now containing digraphs and trigraphs. Again, the individual sets within this phase group digraphs and trigraphs together according to the sequence in which they are taught, and all of the sentences use the next group of tricky words. Phase 4 doesn't introduce any new sounds. Instead, it extends the length and complexity of the words children are reading and spelling. This starts with words containing consonant blends, such as in frog or nt in paint. The two consonants together don't make a new sound in the way they do in a digraph. Instead, the individual sounds are simply blended closely together. We teach children to recognize this and blend the consonants together to help them tackle longer words, especially words like crunch, which contains consonant clusters at both ends. Phase 4 also explores polysyllabic words, giving children strategies for reading and spelling longer words, such as chimpanzee. The individual sets in this phase group similar word structures together, progressing in difficulty with each set. Again, all sentences in this phase use the next group of tricky words. Phase 5 introduces alternative graphemes and alternative pronunciations. For example, A and A can both represent the long A sound. These are alternative graphemes for the same sound, whereas the letter G can represent the sound in grapes or the sound in giraffe. These are alternative pronunciations of the same grapheme. In this phase, we use consistent approaches to support children in making best bet choices when deciding which grapheme to use when spelling or which pronunciation to use when reading. Phase 5 is split into 5A, 5B, 5C, 5D, and 5E. Each subsection has an overriding core skill, and the individual sets within that subsection then cover groups of similar sounds or letters. For example, 5A covers vowel sound families, with each set focusing on a different sound family. 5B covers other common sound families. 5C covers alternative pronunciations, like the earlier example of G being pronounced differently in grape and giraffe. 5D covers alternative spellings. This is similar to the sound families, but using graphemes typically found in more advanced words. 5E continues this with even more advanced alternative spellings. Again, all sentences in Phase 5 incorporate the next group of tricky words. Phase 6 introduces prefixes, suffixes, and further spelling and grammar rules. It is split into 6A, 6B, and 6C. Phase 6 is a little different to the other phases, as it doesn't target particular tricky words in the sentence tasks. This is because the English curriculum introduces a much longer list of common exception words in Year 2. So, bolted onto Phase 6, we have a dedicated common exception words section. Here you'll find 10 games, 5 reading games, and 5 spelling games. These can be played at any time, sprinkled into little pockets throughout your week. The sequence in which you cover these words doesn't matter in relation to Phase 6. These games are designed primarily to aid memory, while still acknowledging the tricky part within each word. You wouldn't teach all of the words at the same time in every game. Instead, choose a selection of words to focus on and change that selection regularly. Now, back to the main Phase 6 subsections. Phase 6A introduces prefixes and suffixes that don't require a spelling rule. You simply add them to the root word. This introduces children to the concept that adding a prefix or suffix to a root word can change its meaning. Phase 6B uses the same suffixes, but this time introduces the spelling rules required when adding them to certain words. For example, some words ending in Y require you to change the Y to an I and then add the suffix. Phase 6C then explores further suffixes, further spelling rules, and further grammatical concepts, such as contractions and homophones, to name just a few. All of the content within each subsection is organised in the same order as it appears in the Key Stage 1 National Curriculum for England. Now, whilst we're talking about the National Curriculum for England, it's important that I point out here that Toolbox Phonics covers every statutory sound and spelling rule from the Key Stage 1 National Curriculum. So you have peace of mind that everything is being covered. The national curriculum also provides guidance on which skills to cover in Year 1 and then Year 2. Toolbox Phonics does not divide its content by year group because it organises the content into phonetic categories. So, if you are teaching strictly in line with the Year 1 and Year 2 guidance, you can simply pause Phase 5 after 5C and move across to 6A. Then, in Year 2, continue with the remaining Phase 5 content alongside 6B and 6C. The subsections within Phase 5 are ordered so that the sounds recommended for Year 2 appear towards the end of 5D. The same principle applies to Phase 6, where 6A covers the Year 1 recommended prefixes and suffixes, before 6B and 6C move into the Year 2 recommended suffixes and spelling rules. But remember, the curriculum requirements are statutory by the end of Key Stage 1. The Year 1 and Year 2 split provides guidance, so don't worry if you cover some additional sounds earlier. And don't worry about remembering all of this. We have a dedicated page containing all of the guidance. Here, over on our guidance page, we have an overview comparing the national curriculum with Toolbox Phonics, so you can cross-reference which curriculum content is covered at each point within the program. We also have a printable guide that briefly explains all 6 phonics phases. Then we have an individual printable guide for each phase. If you're new to phonics, I recommend reading the relevant guide before teaching each phase. Each one is only a single A4 page, with phases 5 and 6 having an individual page for each subsection. You can even share these with your students' parents so that everyone is on the same page. Now let's move on to Pillar 2, play-based learning. Toolbox Phonics does what other traditional SSP programs don't. It combines play-based learning with systematic phonics teaching. Toolbox Phonics doesn't only think about what is taught. We place just as much importance on how it is taught. Young children learn through play, and there are different forms of play. Toolbox Phonics uses a game-based approach. Why? Games are fun, engaging, and motivating. And put simply, they get and keep children's attention. The learning is built into the game. The children know it's a learning game, but that doesn't matter. They're motivated to play. You have their attention, and you know that throughout the game, they are looking at, engaging with, and repeatedly practicing their phonics. Toolbox Phonics has a very clear philosophy. Written language is a code. We use game-based play to teach children that code in a logical and planned sequence. Alongside this, we advocate using child-led play to give children a genuine purpose for using their reading and writing. This takes phonics from an abstract concept to remember and turns it into something children can use in real life. Both elements of play are important, and both have their own unique job. Games teach the written code, play gives a reason to use it. Now let's take a look at Pillar 3, cognitive load. Nothing at Toolbox Phonics is accidental. We combine the theory of how children learn with the practical reality of using a fun and engaging game-based approach. Managing cognitive load is really important because it reduces the number of new concepts a child is expected to process at any one time. The entire sequence within Toolbox Phonics has been planned with this in mind. Nothing is without purpose. Reducing cognitive load is planned into the phonetic sequence itself. Sounds are introduced step by step, constantly building upon and revisiting what has already been taught. Reducing cognitive load is also achieved through introducing concepts gradually. Throughout Toolbox Phonics, new concepts are deliberately dripped into earlier phases and lessons. This exposes children to an idea before they are expected to learn and apply it explicitly. So, when they reach that point in the program, it isn't an entirely new concept. You can see this across every phase in the Toolbox Phonics program. In Phase 1, there are games that expose children to letter shapes and sounds, preparing them for Phase 2, where they formally learn each letter and its sound in isolation. In Phase 2, we introduce the concept of two letters representing one sound through letter combinations, such as k, s, f, and ul. So, when children are later introduced to digraphs, such as ch, the idea of two letters working together isn't completely new. In Phase 3, children are introduced to longer two-syllable words and words containing multiple digraphs. In Phase 4, they are introduced to the concepts of vowels and consonants, preparing them to use this terminology within many of the spelling rules introduced at Phase 5. And in Phase 5, they are introduced to the concept of spelling rules, which naturally become more complex as they move into Phase 6. This deliberate early exposure to more challenging concepts helps each phase blend seamlessly into the next. And don't worry if you've chosen to teach 6A before completing all of Phase 5, as I mentioned earlier, to align with the National Curriculum Guidance. The words in 6A are deliberately chosen so that they only contain sounds taught up to Phase 5C. Toolbox Phonics applies this cognitive load principle to all skills and strategies. Throughout the entire program, we consistently use the same terminology, the same decoding and blending strategies, and the same encoding and spelling strategies. This means that as children progress through the phases and begin tackling more challenging words, they continue to be supported by familiar underlying strategies. We even plan for games early in the program to playfully incorporate support tools such as sound mats. The game itself could work just as easily using letter cards, but by using an enlarged sound mat instead, you're simultaneously teaching children how to use that support tool. This is what a careful, systematic synthetic program does. It maps out all sounds, skills, and strategies so that learning builds upon itself, brick by brick, until they have all the tools needed for fluent reading and writing. And finally, managing cognitive load also needs to be considered in the way games are introduced, and this is really important. If a child is learning a brand new game with brand new rules, whilst also learning a brand new phonetic concept, the cognitive load can become too high. Their attention can end up focused more on understanding how to play the game than on the learning itself. This heavily influenced the games chosen for Toolbox Phonics. All of the games were deliberately selected to provide a balance between simplicity and fun. The vast majority put a phonics twist on games already familiar to most children. Think racing, corners, snakes and ladders, musical chairs. So, provided children are already familiar with these games, the rules don't add significantly to their cognitive load. Where Toolbox Phonics does introduce a new or unique game, we deliberately introduce it first within a revisit activity. This means children have more capacity to learn the new game rules while practicing familiar phonics. Then, when that game appears again alongside new learning, the children already understand how to play. Their attention can focus on the new sound, skill, or spelling rule instead. As I said, nothing is accidental at Toolbox Phonics. And with that being said, you can absolutely swap our games for some of your own, or you can use our dedicated All Games page to cherry pick your favourite games. But always bear in mind that the overall sequence of Toolbox Phonics has been designed to manage cognitive load, both in terms of new phonics learning and new game rules. So, if you do mix things up, or simply use Toolbox Phonics for game ideas, just make sure that you aren't introducing a brand new game and a brand new piece of learning at exactly the same time. Okay, that's Toolbox Phonics introduced. Now let's dive into the how-tos. So, how to use Toolbox Phonics. Let's start with setting up your account. This is super easy. Simply head to the pricing page and choose the package that applies to you. If you're an individual teacher looking for your own personal account, a homeschooling parent, or a private tutor, you'll want the individual account. You can choose to pay monthly or annually. Now, I want to be completely transparent about something here. The reason I describe Toolbox Phonics as particularly suitable for homeschooling parents, rather than parents looking for a quick after school ready to go activity, is that the games require an adult to lead them, and they also require some preparation. You'll need to print or write out the focus words and pictures so that you can add the learning into the games. Homeschooling parents are generally already doing this kind of curriculum preparation, so they'll know what to expect. That said, as long as you have the time available to prepare and deliver the games, parents supporting children alongside school can absolutely use Toolbox Phonics too. Now, back to the account options. If you're looking for a school package, choose the school option. This gives one central adult administrator access plus individual logins for 10 teachers. Or if you're a leader within a school chain or academy, you can choose the school chain option. This provides central administrator control plus 30 individual teacher logins. Now, let's dive into how to actually use the lessons. First, find your starting point. If you're unsure which phase to start from, you can complete a quick assessment with your child or children by heading to the assessment page. Start at phase 1. You don't even need your child there initially. Simply work through the questions and answer them based on your existing knowledge of your child or children. If the questions are far too easy, exit and move to phase 2 or another phase until you reach questions where you genuinely don't know whether your child could read or spell those words. At that point, bring your child in and work through the assessment together. Ask them to read or spell the suggested words. Once they start making errors, simply stop. That's where you start teaching from. Sometimes it can be tempting, particularly when children begin making spelling errors, to continue because you know they could recognize more sounds or read words beyond the point at which their spelling began to dip. That's because children will typically recognize more sounds than they can read in words, and they can often read more words than they can spell, and they can often spell more words than they can accurately use within sentences. It's great to acknowledge everything a child can do, but Toolbox Phonics aims to keep assessment purposeful rather than performative. We also want to get children in and out of assessment as quickly as possible before it becomes stressful. Once we've identified where the gaps are in their phonics knowledge, we have the information we need. That is the teaching starting point. So stop there. How you deliver the assessment is up to you. You know your child or children best. You might simply print the page and work through it together like a worksheet. That's absolutely fine. Or you might know that doing this would switch your child off immediately and wouldn't give you an accurate picture of what they can do. In that case, over the course of a day, you might play little games using the words from the assessment sheet. This allows you to see what they can read and spell in a much more engaging way. You can then transfer what you've discovered onto the assessment sheet to keep a record. Then, a few weeks later, when you want to check the progress they're making, use the same assessment page again and continue from where they previously left off. Again, stop as soon as they begin making errors. Now for the lessons. Once you know your child's phase, go to the Lessons tab, select your phase, and select your set. Here, within the actual set, you'll find everything and more that you need to teach that set of sounds or skills. It's organized into 3 simple steps. Step 1, download your plan. Start at the top of the page and download the plan you need, depending on whether you are teaching one-to-one or a group of children. Both plans use the same games. The game rules are simply tweaked slightly to account for the different number of players. Let's take a look at a planning document to see how it is structured. Throughout the entire program, our lessons are split into 5 games. The first game is a revisit game. This simply revises previously taught sounds and skills from that phase. In phase 6 specifically, it revisits key grammar concepts that the children will need within that lesson. The second game is the teach game. This introduces the new sounds and spelling rules for the set you're working on. You have a choice here. You can teach all 4 sounds together at the beginning of the week, or you can focus on one sound each day and repeat the teach game with a different sound each time. In phase 6 specifically, the teach game introduces the new prefix, suffix, or spelling and grammar rule for that set. The third game is the read game. This allows the child or children to practice reading words containing the focus sounds. Toolbox Phonics deliberately provides more than enough words and pictures for each set. This gives you the option to focus on one new sound each day if you prefer, and cherry pick the words containing just that sound. Or, if you're practicing all 4 sounds within one game, simply choose a selection of words. The children don't need to read every single word provided. The fourth game is the spell game. This allows children to practice spelling words containing the focus sounds and to practice applying any associated spelling rules. Again, there are more than enough picture cards provided if you want to focus on one sound each day and pull out those specific cards. The fifth game is the sentence game. This is the only game that becomes slightly more of a structured activity. Here, children slow down, sit down, and practice good pencil grip and writing posture. Initially, phase 2 focuses on captions before progressing to sentences around halfway through the phase. And, as I mentioned earlier, all sentences in each phase only contain sounds and tricky words that have been taught up to that set. Now let's look at when you should teach each game. Toolbox Phonics doesn't dictate when you should teach each game within your daily timetable, as days vary from class to class and person to person. You might choose to teach one sound a day, whereas someone else might choose to teach one game a day. You might have a designated slot for the teach game, followed by either a read or spell game, alternating the skill you focus on each day. Then you might slot revisit games repeatedly into little pockets of spare time throughout the week, such as after a quick tidy up, before lunch, whilst waiting for another activity. You also might complete the sentence tasks in small groups, working with just a few children. When you teach each game is up to you. But wherever possible, spread the games out. They are much more effective when delivered in short, sharp bursts. And a quick note for private tutors. As a private tutor, you'll typically see your students less frequently throughout the week. When I was private tutoring, I would usually teach one set per week and see the child twice within that week. Each game lasts around 10 minutes. During the first session, I would usually play 3 or 4 games depending on how engaged the child was. Then, during the second session, I would revisit the games or skills that I either didn't use in the first session or that I had identified as needing some more practice. Okay, so that's how the plan works. Once you've downloaded and read the plan, it is completely up to you whether you use all of the games, focus on certain skills, or swap one of the suggested games for another. Perhaps you already have a game in mind, or perhaps you know that a particular Toolbox Phonics game simply won't work within the space you have available. It is absolutely fine to change a game. Just remember what I explained at the beginning of this training. Toolbox Phonics places games carefully so that new game rules are generally learnt during the revisit activities. So, whenever you swap one game for another, just make sure you aren't asking children to learn a brand new or complicated game at exactly the same time as brand new phonics learning. Step 2, the supporting resources. Now you've got your plan, you've read it, and you've decided which games you want to keep or swap, you scroll down to Step 2, the supporting resources. Toolbox Phonics provides everything you could need, phonics-wise, to support the lesson. Depending on the phase, this includes flashcards, picture cards, letter formation cards, songs and MP3s, spelling rule posters, and grammar posters. In fact, the spelling and grammar posters are particularly helpful for adults because they provide a quick visual reminder of the rule being taught. They're also child-friendly, so you can print them and keep them to hand for reference during the game. Toolbox Phonics doesn't expect you to remember every single spelling and grammar rule. We give you this information lesson by lesson. Download and print any supporting resources you need. Anything you don't need, simply don't print. For example, many schools will already have their own sets of letter flashcards. You can absolutely use those with our games. You also don't have to use the Toolbox Phonics mnemonics. The important thing is to be consistent with the ones you do use with your child. For example, if your letter cards use A for apple as its picture reference, use those same flashcards consistently and make sure your sound mat uses the same picture mnemonics. Some children can easily move between different picture references, but others rely heavily on a consistent visual when learning and revisiting new sounds until those sounds become secure. So consistency is key. Step 3 is the games. Once you have your supporting resources, scroll down to Step 3, the games. These are the same games detailed within the lesson plan. It doesn't matter whether you downloaded the individual or the group lesson plan, the games used are the same, just with slightly different rules. Depending on which games you want to play, simply download the ones you need. That might be all of them, or it might only be specific games. When downloaded, each game comes with additional how to play instructions. This is particularly useful if you're passing a game to a teaching assistant to deliver. Once you've downloaded the games, print and cut out whatever you need. Sometimes the printable resource is the game itself, for example, a board game. Other times, you'll receive letter, picture, or word cards that you then add into a more physical game. Save yourself some printing. Another thing worth noting here is that each game comes with the exact letter, picture, and word cards needed. However, the games in each set often use the same pictures and the same word cards, so it's worth taking a quick look before printing everything. You'll often be able to save on printing by reusing the same picture or word cards across several games. There are a few occasions where you'll want to print the cards specifically designed for that particular game. For example, there is a specific game that requires pictures to be attached to a headband. Those picture cards have been created in a much smaller size. So, always take a look at exactly what's included in each game so that you are only printing and preparing what you need. I'm a teacher too. I know how precious your time is. I don't want you printing and preparing additional resources when you don't need to. The final part of preparing the games is preparing the toolbox itself, the very thing that gave Toolbox Phonics its name. Scroll right down to the bottom of the page. Here you'll find a visual list of all the tools needed to bring the games to life. You'll also find this information on the lesson plan itself, right in the middle of the page. All of the tools you'll ever need are things you would typically find either in a classroom or around the house. And if there's something you don't have, simply substitute it for something similar. No beanbags? Use small balls, rolled up socks, or even scrunched up paper. I suggest using a fly swatter, but you don't have one. Use a spatula, or even just your hand. The tool is there to bring the games to life. It doesn't need to be exact. So, why Toolbox Phonics? As a teacher and tutor myself, my toolbox became something of a trademark. I would arrive at a lesson with my box of tricks, and the children knew that whatever was inside that box was our games for the day. They knew the games were learning games, but that didn't stop them from being excited to see what was inside. You absolutely don't need to use a literal toolbox to store your game items. It's simply a metaphor. Gather the resources you need and use them to bring fun to the phonics learning. Now for the final part of your onboarding training, looking at what other tools are available on the website. Toolbox Phonics really does provide everything you need to support your child's phonics journey. Let me quickly show you some of the other tools available on the website. First, we have our starter pack. This page allows you to build your very own starter pack, choosing from letter flashcards organized by phase, letter formation cards, supplementary pencil control and drawing prompts, sound mats, and tricky word lists. These are perfect for classroom displays or for keeping permanently available around your home or classroom, so phonics support is always within arm's reach. I recommend always having a large phonics display somewhere in your classroom where children can always see it simply by looking up. Then have smaller sound mats available on tables, within play spaces, in book corners, wherever children are likely to need them. The idea is that support is always close enough for children to independently reach for it. I even keep small versions on my lanyard. On the training videos page, here you'll find our training package, where you and your team can learn about the theory behind phonics and play. Then in addition, we have our Teacher's Corner. This is our termly newsletter and blog space, where I share articles and insights on both phonics and play-based learning. Think of this space as your teacher's companion, supporting your ongoing professional knowledge of phonics and how young children learn best. If you're a school leader, these resources can also be incorporated into your CPD timetable. Our seasonal game section is where you'll find themed games for those festive moments throughout the year. They're simply another way of adding a little extra fun and engagement to learning. If pumpkins and spiders are highly motivating for your children that week, use that motivation in their phonics games too. Sometimes it's simply about understanding what makes children tick. And that brings us to the end of our onboarding training. Thank you for joining Toolbox Phonics. I am so excited for both you and your children to start enjoying phonics, just as it should be. All feedback is greatly appreciated and warmly welcomed, so please drop us a message using the contact and feedback box at the bottom of most pages across the website. Share your thoughts with us, no matter how big or small. We take everything on board, and wherever we can, we use that feedback to continue improving the website and the program. Thank you for joining us. Toolbox Phonics. We plan it, you play it.